Hi, good afternoon. My name is Nita Upadhye. I am Managing Attorney of NNU Immigration. And today we're going to talk about E-2 visas for startup companies. This is the first of a series of webinars that our firm is giving over the course of this next year and beyond. And we're enthusiastic about sharing our knowledge and our insight with you. As you know, it's a challenging time in U.S. immigration. But if you get the right advice and prepare your application carefully, meticulously, and document it extremely well, you would still have a chance of getting a visa to operate your business in the US. So the way this half hour is going to go is I would like to talk through the regulations with you of the E-2 visa. We're also then just going to dive a little bit deeper into certain aspects of the E-2 visa requirements. And then we're going to also spend some time doing role play. I'm here with my wonderful colleague, Eva, and she's going to be my client, and we're going to go through a bit of a role play so that you can see that you can get an example of the kind of business that might be looking for our help and how we might be able to help them. Let's get started. I'd like to just talk about what the E-2 visa is. So it is a visa that allows British nationals or nationals of countries that have a requisite treaty of trade and commerce to go to the US, invest in a US business, and develop and direct that business. There has to be a certain amount of capital to put into the business before you can actually get the visa. So some of the key requirements there would be that the business has to possess the nationality of the treaty country. So it means that you've got to, if you're applying for the visa, have to have a particular nationality. First, there has to be the requisite treaty of trade and commerce between the US and the foreign country, and you have to have the nationality of that country, and the business has to have that nationality. The company has to have been invested in the US enterprise. There has to actually be a real investment in the US enterprise. There just can't be a speculative investment. There has to be a real and operating commercial enterprise, meaning that, again, it can't be a company that is going to be operating. It actually really has to show that it is in the process of operating. So all of the necessary elements of the E-2 visa and the business have to be in place. Next, the investment must be substantial. We'll talk about that in more detail. The investment must be more than a marginal investment. And then we're going to talk briefly about employees and what you need as an employee or an investor to be able to get a visa. Lastly, the employee or the investor has to intend to depart the United States at the end of the E-2 visa. Now, just generally speaking, there's no minimum investment amount. We'll go into this a little more detail. But you must prove that the amount is sufficient to operate that particular type of business. So it can be a challenge, although it can be a benefit in that there's no minimum threshold amount. But it's a challenge in that you don't know exactly how much you should invest, and that really ultimately is the embassy's call as to whether you've invested enough money. The visa can be renewed indefinitely. That's another important key point to remember, that you can renew it indefinitely, possibly, potentially every 5 years, because the visa is typically granted for a 5-year period. And it's also worth noting that the entire application process is handled through a U.S. embassy abroad. So you avoid the more challenging process of dealing with USCIS offices in the States. I'd like to just go a little bit deeper then into one key aspect of the E-2 visa, which is the investment. So when we get calls, the biggest question is, the first question is, how much do I have to invest? How much money do I need? How much capital do I need to put into the business? Well, the first thing I tell our clients is that there's no minimum investment amount, but the investment has to be sufficient to support the business. So in the eyes of the embassy, they want to know that this person, this investor in front of them that they're interviewing, has made enough of an investment and has put as much money as necessary to get the business running. And so you've got to show that within the business, the type of business that you're running, that you put enough money into it so that as soon as your visa is approved, you can get out there and hit the ground running. Now, sufficient is subjective, of course, because let's just say you want to set up, let's just say a restaurant establishment. Well, there might be a lot of capital that you have to put into a business like that to get that business running. You need a premises. You might need to build out that space. You'll probably want to get suppliers in place. You want to get any sort of equipment that you need. So there's going to actually be a lot that you need to spend before you can even operate the business. But then in the reverse, you've got something like a type of business where you're doing consulting, business consulting, for example. You might not need much capital to put into the business at all because you could just use a laptop and sit in an office and do your work without needing a lot of capital, without needing a lot of equipment or other supplies to operate. And so it's a challenge to know where to find the balance of investing as much as you need, but also showing the embassy that you are making a genuine commitment to setting up the business. Because if you were to tell the embassy, all I need is a laptop to run this business, they'll say, well, that doesn't give us enough confidence that you're making a true commitment. So you have to show an at-risk investment. Oftentimes clients say, this is a bit of a chicken and an egg. You're telling me that I need to put money into a US business and sink some money into it and put some investment and buy some things and buy equipment and get an office space and pay for things that I might not need right away, but I don't know if I even have the visa. So that's what the embassy wants to see. They want to see that you are so motivated to run this business that you're willing to put money at risk in getting this visa. So you actually need to show that you are willing to lose your investment if the visa doesn't get approved. And then you have to show, that then shows that you have an irrevocable commitment. It means that you are not going to turn back. You are truly committed to setting up this business. So specifically, what would constitute a qualifying expense? So that's always the next question when I go through this talk with potential clients. I say there's no minimum investment, but we've got to show, depending on the nature of your business, what would be needed, reasonably needed to get that business off the ground. And then they ask, okay, well, yes, actually there are already costs that I've incurred. And so then we ask, and then they say, is this a qualifying expense? So we really give this general guideline about what's a qualifying expense. So professional fees, such as accounting fees, legal fees in setting up the business. So you might have to pay a business lawyer to get your business incorporated. And certainly immigration lawyers' fees would be included in a qualifying expense. Equipment costs, again, going back to sort of the restaurant example. You can possibly need to get kitchen equipment. You might need to get tables and chairs and storage facility and freezers and refrigerators. All of that equipment would count. We worked once with some owners who owned a series of a whole chain of gyms, and they wanted to set up in their fitness center in Florida. So we explained to them that they should get equipment, and they said, well, we're actually building out space first. We're not going to need to put equipment in quite yet. We explained to them that even if you're going to pay in advance, even if you're not going to actually be using that equipment immediately, it's good for you to put the cost into that equipment, purchasing that equipment for visa purposes, to show the embassy that you really do mean business, and to show that you have put all the costs into the business needed to get the business running. Intellectual property costs. So this could be, so for example, if you have some sort of proprietary product or proprietary software, for example, that you're going to be giving, that the US business is going to own. they own that asset, then that could be, to the extent that we could put a value on that intellectual property, that could be counted in the qualifying expenses. Marketing costs. Surely if you're looking to set up in the US, you might be incurring marketing costs even before getting out there because you want to know that there's going to be a pipeline of work. Web development, you might have to, if you already have a business and you've got a website, you might need to revamp the website to cater to the US market. So web development costs might be, would be a qualifying expense. US salaries. So if you hire someone in advance of formally getting the business going, so you might need someone on the ground to help with maybe initial business development or help with some marketing activities to get a feel for, what direction you need the business to go. Any sort of salaries or payments that you've made to a US worker on the ground there, again, even if this is before the business is fully launched, that would count toward a qualifying expense. Lastly, vendor payments would also count as a qualifying expense. Again, if you've got any sort of equipment that's needed or services that are needed in advance, then you could count that as a qualifying expense. So that's the investment, kind of an investment overview. If you've got specific questions about what would qualify, I'm happy to address that, but it's safe to say that anything that you have incurred, any expense that you have incurred in the setup of the US business, no matter where that expense has been incurred, could count as a qualifying expense. How much weight that expense carries is really left up to the embassy. But even if that expense is incurred in the UK, that's often a question that also comes up. Do I have to actually purchase things in the US? Are those the only costs that count in the investment calculation? The answer is no. You could incur all of the expenses and costs here in the UK, and as long as those expenses are earmarked for the US business, then that would be deemed a qualifying expense. Moving on to business setup. It's another element that is often asked about. Do I have to set up the business before I get the visa? The short answer is yes. You've got to actually have the business established and incorporated prior to the submission of the visa application. But even beyond just incorporation, you also have to show that you have all sort of foundational aspects of the business in place to operate that business. So that comes under sort of the real and operating element of the E-2 visa. And so not only do you have to have the business incorporated, but we need to show that the company has a federal taxpayer identification number issued by the IRS. We need to show that there's a business bank account. We need to show that there's an office premises, even if it's sort of a serviced office initially. So we have to show that you actually have the infrastructure in place and you have all the legal elements and all the compliance elements in place to be able to set up to operate the business. It could also mean you might need a business license within your particular line of work. If it's a type of business that requires special regulation and special licensing, then maybe in some cases financial services need special licensing, then that has to be dealt with even before the application is filed. The other question that often comes up is business plan. People say, do I need a business plan to apply for the visa? And the answer to that is yes, it's actually quite an important part of the visa application. And oftentimes clients say, can we prepare that plan for them? And we tell them that we can't prepare the plan because we don't know the business. So we can give you a format to follow, but really it's about you thinking through, what are the operational strategies? What's the personnel strategy? How are you going to build the team? What's the marketing strategy? How are you going to grow that business? And then also a key element of the business plan are financial projections. So you want to work with ideally your accountant or something to come up with realistic, verifiable financial projections. And you need to be able to give a narrative behind those financial projections. How did you come up with those? Are they realistic? Looking at the industry, looking at where your business might go. It's important to really emphasize how, in your business plan, how jobs will be created over the ideal 5-year period in which you might be getting that visa. So one of the key things the embassy looks for is, how is this business going to create jobs? What is the economic impact that this business will have on the local economy? And so the clear way to quantify that is jobs. And so you want to be able to explain in your business plan how jobs are going to be created. And it could be with a small business, certainly with a startup, that it's maybe 1 or 2 people, and maybe those are administrative positions. That's okay. It should be realistic. You don't want to say that you're going to hire 10 people if that's not realistic. So you want to be realistic, but ideally you want to show that the jobs will grow over time. Again, it might be 1 or 2 people more. You might start out with a few people and add a few people over that 5-year period, but they really do want to know how you're planning to create jobs. These could be part-time jobs also, not only full-time. We worked once with an independent film producer who said, look, for each film project, we're going to need a big crew of people, but these are all contract workers, and I'm not going to need to keep them on payroll all year. And we said, that's perfectly fine. It's the nature of your business to hire independent contract workers. That's creating jobs even if they're temporary jobs. People ask, is the format of the plan important? We say, no, it's not. It's the content. It's, of course, the content of the plan. And again, for clients who work with us, we try to make it as easy as possible by giving a sample business plan so that you at least have a model to follow and you can focus on the important stuff, which is putting that content into the plan. We, of course, review that plan to see, does it touch on the right points and does it emphasize the right points clearly enough? But the actual content needs to come from you as the entrepreneur. Lastly, on the topic of business plans, a good business plan does not need to be lengthy, but must contain the essential information about the outlook of the business. So you don't have to be worried about trying to create a 50-page business plan. It might even be 10 pages. Maybe it's even 5 pages. Page numbers not important. The length isn't as important as the actual content of that business plan. Moving on quickly to application documents. Running through that, people often ask, what else do I need to supply? I mean, essentially, sort of the framework of an application would consist of a DS-160 application, which has to be carefully prepared. It's an online application form. That's one component of the E-2 visa. You've also got another government form called the DS-156E form. Again, has to be carefully prepared. Then there should be some sort of case that's made on your behalf. And ideally that comes in the form of a comprehensive attorney letter, a lawyer's letter making the case for you, showing how you're eligible for the visa and giving the justification for granting the visa. And then there has to be a whole host of supporting documents, including investment documentation, incorporation documentation, the business plan, and proof that the investor, you as the investor, are qualified to run the business. So we want to go into what your qualifications are. Maybe you've been running a business in the UK. So then we show that you have that business experience. If it's sort of a new venture, we show how you have the ability to run and develop and direct the business. The application, once it's carefully prepared and assembled and ready for submission, it is submitted electronically, at least in London, to the US Embassy. Most embassies now are going into an electronic submission process. Moving on to the timeline aspect of the E-2 visa. You want to allow, at least in London, and focused on London really for purposes of this brief webinar, is you want to allow for a 3-month process. And included in that 3-month process, there's the preparation stage, which depends on how swiftly you as a client can source the documentation we need. we need. There's the submission and review stage. So from the time of submission, takes typically up to 6 weeks for the initial review, meaning the review by the U.S. Embassy. And then there's that interview stage, so we have to allow for some time to schedule in, lock in an interview date, and have the interview. And then assuming the interview is successful, actually as part of that interview stage also there's the preparation session, which is quite an important part of the process is in getting prepared for that interview. So we sit and have a mock interview with you so you're well prepared. And then lastly, you've got the passport delivery stage. So it takes about, again in London, about 1 week after an interview to obtain your passport. Now, finally, people ask, can I travel? What, am I limited prior to the application process and during the application process, can I travel? The answer is yes, but you should proceed with caution. That's really all I could say about that. You cannot manage or operate the business until you have the visa, but you can travel if you need to go and meet a vendor or a supplier or go to a client meeting, again, as long as you're not operating the business. I'd like to then, in the final sort of 6 minutes, I believe that we've got, bring this to life a little bit through a mock interview. So I'm going to have my wonderful colleague Eva come in for a consultation with me, and we're going to talk about her business plan and how we might be able to get her an E-2 visa. So everyone, introducing Eva. Thank you for coming and meeting with me this morning, Eva, this afternoon. Can I ask about the kind of the kind of business that you're looking to set up? I understand you're looking to set up a business in the U.S. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
What's your nationality?
I'm from Czech Republic.
Okay. And Czech Republic does have the treaty with the U.S., so we can explore the E-2 option for you. Tell me about your dream business. Tell me about what you want to do.
I would like to set up a hotel for pets. It can be any kind of pets. Would be, anyone can be accommodated. I was planning to focus on California, on that location, and I think the main reason is that America is such a big market and they have a little bit different lifestyle than we have back in Czech Republic, and I know that there is a good potential for this kind of business. So
that's your plan and that's your goal. Okay. So can you go into a little bit more detail about the actual business itself? What services are you looking to provide in the business?
So it would be long terms and short terms. We will be offering services for long terms and short terms, looking after the pets. It will be onboarding, so they will be having all inclusive services. Depends on what you would like us to provide for your pets. It can, obviously the standard would be walking and looking after them, feeding them, but you can also have a little, almost like a mini spa. So you can choose if you want to have your pet would like to get a haircut or clip the nails, whatever, vaccination, visit vet during that stay, whatever would be your request, they would be able to accommodate because it becomes all-inclusive hotel.
Okay, so I assume that you are a passionate, animal lover. But can you tell me a little bit about your business background? How do you think that you can develop and direct this business?
Okay, so my biggest advantage, I would say, is that I'm passionate about animals and I love them and I want to make this work. I have never run a business, so I do not have a experience running the business. However, I've been working since I was 18 years old and I've been working for many companies and I kind of get the idea, or I have the basic understanding of what has to be done to run the business. So I think, I just would like to go and see if it can work.
Okay, and so have you already done a scoping trip? Have you already gone out to sort of look at, to be there on the ground and see who your competitors may be?
Yes, absolutely. So I did a short trip to California and I traveled a little bit around to see what would be the perfect location. I also had a market research done, so I can see that there is a potential, and there is the market is not, there's not that many competitors there, and the services we are providing, we would like to provide, which would be also a training your pets while you're away and all kind of correcting the behaviors if they are not perfect. It's not really on that market, so I can kind of feel that that would be the best time. And also California's got beautiful weather, so it's not like here in London when it's raining all the time. You have a perfect weather most of the year, which for this kind of business is ideal.
Okay, and so when you say we, would you be working with a business partner, or initially is it you setting up the business?
It would be initially me. Yes, I would like to set up a business on my own, and then eventually I would like to bring some people with me, because I already kind of know who's from my circle would be perfect for kind of jobs once it's raised. But I would like to start us on my own.
Would you eventually, this all works out, be looking to create some local jobs?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Okay. And let's just then turn to the investment. So I understand what your business concept is, and you talk about having sort of general business experience for many, many years, and you feel that you have the know-how to get the business off the ground. You've done your market research, and you have an idea of how you'd like your team built out. Let's talk about investments. Where are you getting the capital to put into the business? And from your point of view, how much money do you think you need to put into the business to get it off the ground?
Okay. So I do own a small flat, which I was thinking that if it would be necessary, I would sell it, so I would get some capital from that. And also I was planning to borrow some money from my sister, and then possibly I have some saving left. But ideally it would be the money from the flat and borrowing money from my sister.
Okay. And how much money are we talking about here?
Well, obviously I would need to buy a place. I would, or on the beginning, maybe just hire some place before we get a little bit bigger. So I was thinking if I sell the flat, and I'm thinking maybe around £50,000 on the beginning, and then see where it goes, how much money I would need.
So that's how much capital you'd be able to release to put into the business.
Yes.
And do you think that amount of money, £50,000, is going to be enough to launch the business?
No, but it would be the start.
Okay.
It would be definitely the start to kind of arrange some rental for the property, and then get some equipment. Obviously we would have to change the rental place, so we will accommodate animals and the different kind of animals. So it would cover the first kind of stage, and then as I said, once I would sell the property or the flat, then I would be able to put more money into it. But the 50,000 would be what I would be borrowing from my sister. That could be accessible immediately, and like an initial investment.
Understood. Okay. So I think here, my assessment, we want to go into much more depth, but that gives me an idea. It allows me to see sort of would the preconditions be met for an E-2 visa. And I see that this is a promising start. You've told me that you've got capital that you have access to, and that at least insofar as the money from the flat and your personal funds, those come from you personally. Any money that you borrow, we'd have to talk about whether that's going to be a loan or perhaps that's just a family gift, because that's treated differently, whether it's a gift or a loan. So most of the money should come from you personally, and we can talk about how that should be structured for the E-2 requirements. But it sounds like you have the capital. It sounds like you have the business concept. Of course, I want to look at the business plan in more detail and actually look at pricing structure and look more closely at your marketing. And then you've said that you have an idea of how you want to build out the business in terms of personnel. So it sounds like there's the makings of an E-2 visa here, and I think that we'd be very pleased to work with you in helping you achieve your dreams and setting up this doggy daycare business. I'd love to work with you. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
So thank you. That really takes us to the end of our webinar here. It was really a whistle-stop tour of the E-2 visa, but hopefully I touched upon the key requirements and gave you some insight and some tips into what you need to think about if you're pursuing an E-2 visa. Also did a little bit of a sample of what kinds of questions that I'd be asking you if you came to talk to us about your E-2 plans. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll be doing visa overviews once a month. So I hope you tune into our future webinars. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.